One night, 4 or 5 gentlemen debated various questions of high transcendence without their polemic differences bringing the slightest alteration in their spirits. The setting was a house in the hills of Santa Teresa. The room was small, illuminated by candles, the glow of which dissolved mysteriously into moonlight coming in from the outside. Between the city with its excitements and adventures and the sky, in which the stars blinkingly looked down across an atmosphere of pure tranquillity, sat our 4 or 5 investigators of things metaphysical, resolving amiably the most difficult problems of the universe. Why 4 or 5? There were 4 of them, strictly speaking, in conversation. But outside of them there was in the room a 5th character, calm, thoughtful, lounging upon the couch, whose contribution to the debate was just an occasional grumble of assent. This man was the same age as his companions, between 40 and 50 years old, from outside the city, capitalist, intelligent, not without schooling, and to what it seemed astute, with a dry wit. He discussed nothing, and defended his recusal with a paradox, saying that the discussion was the polite form of man's innate instinct for war, like an animalistic inheritance, and he added, the seraphim and the cherubim disagreed on nothing, and moreover were eternal and spiritual perfection. As he gave this very riposte that night, one of the contestants objected and challenged him to demonstrate what he was talking about, if he could. Jacobina, as he called himself, reflected a moment and responded, "Fair enough, perhaps your Excellency is right." It was only then at midnight when this contrarian spoke a word, and not for 2 or 3 minutes, but for 30 or 40. The conversation in all its meanderings had come to fall upon the nature of the soul, a point that radically divided the 4 friends. With every thought and every sentence, not only the agreement but even the disagreement became difficult, if not impossible, due to the multiplicity of questions that were deduced from the core of the argument, and a bit perhaps by the inconsistency of the pundits. One of the arguers requested of Jacobina some opinion, a conjecture at least. "Neither conjecture nor opinion," he retorted. "Either one of those can make room for dissent, and as you know, I don't debate. If you want to listen silently, though, I can tell you an episode in my life which stands as the clearest demonstration approximating the matter under discussion. In the first place, there is not only one soul, but 2. 2? Nothing less than 2 souls. Every human creature carries 2 souls with him, one which looks from the inside to the outside, and another which looks from the outside to the inside. Object as you will. You can sit there with your mouths agape, shrug, whatever you wish, but I'll accept no retort. If you retort, I will finish my cigar and go get some sleep. The exterior soul may be a spirit, a fluid, a man, many men, an object, an operation. There are cases, for example, in which a simple shirt button is the exterior soul of a person, and in a similar manner a polka, a game of cards, a book, a machine, a pair of boots, a little song, a drum, and so on. Certainly the office of this second soul is to transmit life like the first. The 2 complete the man who is, metaphysically speaking, an orange. Whoever loses one of these 2 parts loses naturally half his existence, and there are cases, not rare, in which the loss of the exterior soul implies the loss of the entire soul. Shylock, for example, his exterior soul was his ducats. Losing them amounted to death. "I shall never see my gold again," he says to Tubal. "Thou stick'st a dagger in my heart." Note well this phrase. The loss of ducats, exterior soul, was death to him. Now, it's necessary to realize that the exterior soul isn't always the same. No, senor, its nature and its state change. Now, I'm not referring to certain collective souls like the homeland which Camoens said he would die with, or to power, which was the exterior soul of Caesar or Cromwell. but these are souls exclusive and energetic. There are others, besides energetic types, naturally mutable. There are gentlemen, for example, whose exterior soul in infancy was a rattle or a wooden horse, and then later on it was a Center for Public Assistance, let's say. Myself, I know a lady, really very, very sweet, whose exterior soul changes 5-6 times in a year. During the music season, it's the opera. The season ends, and that exterior soul is substituted with another, a concert, a society ball, Overdore Street, Petropolis. Pardon me, who is this lady? This lady is the namesake of the devil, and she is called Legion. And such are many other cases. Even I have experienced these switches. Now, I won't go into detail, as I would veer from the point. I will confine myself to the episode I mentioned earlier, an episode when I was 25. The 4 friends, eager to hear the promised account, forgot their disagreements. Blessed curiosity! You are not only the soul of civilization, you are the apple of concord, a divine fruit, the opposite of that apple from mythology. The room, just moments earlier, full of the clamor of physics and metaphysics, is now a dead sea. All eyes are on Jacobina, who neatens the tip of his cigar, calling back memories of the past, and voila! Here is how he began the narrative. I was 25, poor, and had just been made ensign in the National Guard. Now, you can't imagine what an event this was in our house. My mother was so proud, so pleased, she called me her ensign. Cousins and uncles, everything was a pure, sincere joy. In the town, it should be noted, there was some resentment, crying out and gnashing of teeth like in the Scripture, the motive being none other than this post had had many candidates and that they all lost. I suppose also some of their disgust was completely over the top, arising simply out of the distinction I had achieved. I remember some acquaintances began looking at me sideways for some time, and on the other hand there were those who were pleased by my appointment, and the proof of this is that they were the friends who furnished me with the uniform. So then, one of my aunts, Donna Marcolina, Captain Passanha's widow, who lived many miles from the town in a place sombre and isolated, wanted to see me and asked if I would go visit her and bring my uniform. I went, accompanied by a page, who after a few days returned to the town, because Aunt Marcolina wanted only me there, and wrote to my mother saying that she'd put me up for a month at least. And how she hugged me. She, too, called me her ensign. Found me a fine young man. She was so enthusiastic about me, she confessed she was envious of the woman who would one day be my wife. She swore that in the whole province there was no one else ahead of me, and always ensign. I was ensign here, ensign there, ensign around the clock. I requested that she call me Johnny like before, but she shook her head, singing out that no, I was the esteemed ensign. Her brother-in-law, brother of the late Passanha, who lived there, addressed me in no other way. I was the esteemed ensign, not as a joke, but seriously, and also in the eyes of the slaves who naturally followed suit. I sat at the head of the table and was served first. You can't imagine. Now, what if I tell you that the enthusiasm of Aunt Marcolina reached the point of having put in my room a grand mirror, a work of art, rich and magnificent, not like the rest of the house, the furniture of which was modest and simple. It was a mirror that had been given to her by her godmother, who had inherited it from her mother, who had purchased it from one of the nobility who came in 1808 with the court of Don João VI. Now, I don't know what if it is true, but so went the tradition. The mirror was naturally very old, but one could still see the gold, partially worn away with time, a few dolphins carved into the upper angles of the frame, some mother-of-pearl highlights, and other artistic flourishes, everything old, but good. Was it large? Indeed it was, as I said. and an enormous object of fine art. Because it had been in the living room, it was the best piece of the house. Now, forces do not exist that could make her change her mind. She responded that it wouldn't be missed, that it was only for a few weeks, and that the esteemed ensign deserved much better. What is certain is that all these things, the care, the attention, the deference, created in me a transformation, which the natural exuberance of youth helped and completed. Do you follow me?
No.
The ensign eliminated the man. For several days, the two natures were in balance, but it didn't take long that the one eliminated the other. I was reduced to a minimum of humanity. It happened then that the exterior soul, which before this was the sun, the air, the countryside, the eyes of young women, changed in nature and became the courtesies and the flatteries of the house. Everything of which spoke of my post, nothing of which spoke of the man. The only part of citizen that remained was that which I understood as the exercise of rank. The other dispersed into air and into the past. Hard to believe, no?
It's difficult to understand,
responded one of the audience. Oh, you will. The facts will better explain the feelings. The facts are everything. The best theory of love is nothing compared to the actual kiss of your beloved, and if I remember correctly, it was an ancient philosopher who demonstrated motion by taking one step at a time. So let us proceed to the facts. We'll see how, at the moment the consciousness of the man was obliterated, the ensign animated and intensified. Human pain and human joy, even if they existed, barely elicited from me an apathetic compassion or a perfunctory smile. At the end of 3 weeks, I was someone else. Totally other. I was exclusively the ensign. Well, one day Aunt Marcolina received bad news. One of her daughters, married to a landowner 5 leagues away, was ill and close to death.
Adieu, nephew, adieu, ensign.
She was a dedicated mother, and arranged right away to travel. Asked her brother-in-law to go with her, and left me the care of the household. I think that if it had not been so great an affliction, she would have handled it differently, would have left the brother-in-law and would have gone away with me, but what was certain is that I remained alone, with a few slaves of the house. I confess to you that right away I felt an enormous oppression, something similar to the effect of 4 walls of a prison cell suddenly rising up around me. It was my exterior soul shrinking, limited now to only a few poor ciphers who couldn't even understand or speak proper Portuguese. The ensign continued to dominate me, even though life was less intense and consciousness weakened. The slaves put a touch of humility in their curtsies, which in a way compensated for the loss of family affection and the interruption of domestic intimacy. I was rather surprised that night, though. They redoubled their respect with joy, with protestations. I was Sir Ensign every minute. Sir Ensign is very handsome. Sir Ensign will become a colonel. Sir Ensign will marry a beautiful girl, the daughter of a general. A concert of praises and prophecies that left me ecstatic. The knaves! Little did I expect what they were secretly up to, the devils.
To kill you?
If only.
Something worse?
Listen to me. The next morning I found myself alone. Now, whether they were seduced by others or it was by their own will, those rascals resolved to run away during the night, and so they did. I found myself alone, without anyone within 4 walls, in the middle of a deserted plain, on an abandoned farm. Not a single human breath there. I ran all through the house, the servants' quarters, everywhere, nothing, no one, not even a hiding vagrant, only roosters and chickens, a pair of mules philosophizing on life, the buzz of flies, and 3 oxen. The slaves had liberated the dogs, along with themselves. Not one trace of human entity. Does it seem to you that this was better than to have died? It was worse. And not because of fear, I swear to you, I was not afraid. I was a bit cocky, so much so that I felt nothing, at least at first. I became sad because of Aunt Marcelina's losses. I also became a little perplexed, not knowing whether I should go to her to give her the bad news or stay to look after the house. I committed to the second option, not to leave the house, but also because if my cousin were terribly sick, I would only increase the pain of her mother without a single remedy. In the end, I hoped that Uncle Passanha's brother would return that day or the next, seeing that he had already been gone 36 hours, but the morning came and went without a trace of him. And in the afternoon I began to feel a sensation like a person who had lost all control of his nerves and had no consciousness of muscular action. Uncle Passanha's brother didn't return that day, nor the next, nor all week. My isolation took on enormous proportion. Never were days so long. Never did the sun burn the earth with a more wearying obstinance. The hours struck as if from century to century upon the old clock in the room, whose pendulum injured my interior soul like a continuous finger-tapping out of eternity. Years later, when I read an American poem composed by Longfellow, I came across this famous refrain: "Never, forever, forever, never." I confess to you, it gave me chills as I recalled those frightening days. It was just like that, the clock of Aunt Marcelina. Never, forever, forever, never. It wasn't the tick-tocks of a pendulum. It was a dialogue from the abyss, the whisper of nothingness. And then at night, not that the night was more silent, the silence was the same as the day, but the night was its shadow. It was solitude more narrow or more wide. No one in the rooms, on the veranda, in the corridors, in the yard, no one anywhere. Oh, you laugh.
Well, yes, it seems you were a little afraid.
Oh, if only I could have been afraid. That would have made me alive. But the characteristic of that situation is that I couldn't even sense fear. That is, as fear is commonly understood. I had an inexplicable sensation. It was like the walking dead, or a sleepwalker, or a mechanical doll. Well, sleeping, that was another thing. Sleep brought relief, not by common reason of being the brother of death, but for something else. I think I can explain the phenomenon like this. Sleep, eliminating the necessity of an exterior soul, allowed the interior soul to take action. In dreams, I was in uniform, proud of myself, amid family and friends who praised my panache, who called me ensign. There came a friend of our family, and he promised me a post of captain or major, and all of this made me alive. But when I awoke in the clear day, it all faded away with my sleep, the consciousness of that new and unique being, because the interior soul lost exclusive activity and became dependent on the other soul, which obstinately would not come back. It never returned. I went outdoors from one side to the other to see if I could discover some sign of a return. Sir Anne, ne vois-tu rien venir? Nothing. Not one thing, just like in that old French tale. Nothing more than the dust of the road and the hilltops. I returned to the house, nervous, desperate, collapsed on the settee in the living room. I would get up, walk around, tap my fingers on the panes of the windows, whistle. On one occasion I remember me writing something, a political article, a novel, an ode. I decided on nothing definite. I sat down, traced on paper some words and disconnected sentences in order to integrate it into some form, but the form, like Aunt Marcelina, abandoned me. Sir Anne. Nothing. I could see nothing more than the black of the ink and the white of the paper. Didn't you eat? Oh, I ate. Poorly. Fruit, farina, jam, some tubers roasted over a fire, but would have endured everything joyfully if it weren't for the terrible situation of morale I found myself in. I recited verses, discourses, passages of Latin, lyrics of Gonzaga, stanzas of Camões, sonnets, an anthology in 30 volumes. At times I exercised, at others I pinched my legs, but the effect was only a physical sensation of pain or fatigue, nothing more. Everything was silence. A vast silence. Enormous, infinite, underscored only by the eternal tick-tock of the pendulum.
It's enough to drive you mad.
You will now hear something worse. Now I have to tell you that from the moment I went into solitude, I didn't look even one time into the mirror. It wasn't a deliberate abstinence. There was no reason. It was an unconscious impulse, a fear of finding two of myself at the same time in that solitary house. And if such an explanation were true, nothing demonstrates better the human contradiction at the end of 8 days, because I had the sudden urge to look into the mirror with the object of finding two of myself. I looked and recoiled. The glass itself, seeming to be in conspiracy with the rest of the universe, didn't reflect the figure, sharp and whole, but vague, smoky, diffuse shadow of a shadow. The reality of the laws of physics won't permit denying that the mirror reproduced me verbatim with the same contours and features. It must have been so. But that wasn't my first sensation. So I was afraid. I attributed the phenomenon to the nervous excitement I was in. I was afraid to stay any longer and go mad. "I'm getting out," I said. To myself, I raised my arm with a threatening gesture, and at the same decisive moment, looking into the mirror, the gesture was there, diffused, frayed, mutilated. I went to dress, muttering to myself, gasping, moving my clothes noisily, afflicting myself with the cold buttons in order to say something. From time to time I looked furtively into the mirror. The image was the same diffusion of lines, the same decomposition of shapes. I continued to get dressed. Suddenly, by an inexplicable inspiration, by an uncalculated impulse, I remembered something. Can you guess what my idea was?
Tell us.
I looked into the glass with a desperate persistence, contemplating my dripping and incomplete features, a cloud of dissolving lines, when I had the thought. No, you couldn't possibly guess.
But tell us.
I remembered to put on the ensign's uniform. I put it on immediately, and as I stood in front of the mirror, I raised my eyes. I won't tell you. the glass, then reflected my integrated form. Not one line less, not one variant contour. It was I, myself, the ensign that I found at last, the exterior soul. This soul, absented with the lady of the manor, dispersed and fled along with the slaves, appeared reconstituted in the mirror. Imagine a man who, little by little, emerges from a lethargy, opens his eyes without seeing, but afterwards starts to see, distinguishes people from objects, but doesn't know individually one from the others. Finally, he knows that this is Peter and that's Paul. Here's a chair, there's a sofa. Everything returns to what it was before going to sleep. So it was with me. I looked into the mirror, going from one side to the other, retreating, gesticulating, smiling, and the glass expressed everything. I was no longer an automaton. I was an animated entity. From that moment on, I was someone else. Every day at a particular hour I dressed as the ensign and seated myself in front of that mirror, reading, looking, meditating. At the end of 2 or 3 hours I got back out of uniform. With this regimen I was able to get through 6 more days in solitude without even noticing them. By the time the other gentlemen had returned to themselves, the narrator had already reached the bottom of the stairs. The Mirror, a vignette concerning a new theory of the human soul by Machado de Assis, first published in 1882, translated from Portuguese for audio performance by Todd Conner, copyright 2019, with music from Rosa by Pixinguinha from 1917. If you like this work and would like to support the Karaoke Podcast, please consider making a purchase at the Karaoke Podcast store at teespring.com. A direct link to the store is available on the Karaoke website at www.thekaraoke.com. Or if you'd like to make a donation, just click on the link below for PayPal, and always listen, like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.